Well, howdy, folks, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of my chats with aviation historian Peter Merlin. As most of you know, Peter has been researching Area 51 for well over 30 years, and he literally wrote the book on Area 51. A link to his book on Amazon is in the description. I can only recommend it. Most of what we talk about tonight is from his book, and you'll find more information, lots more information in his book. I also want to thank my channel members for their support. I will actually do a live stream exclusively for members next Friday at this time, 5 p.m. PDT, and also for my German members on Friday at 9 p.m. German time. It only costs a few bucks, and you support my work, and you will get exclusive access to some behind the scenes material. And of course, a big thank you to Linda, aka Dragon Rose, for being once again my moderator and wingman here. We'll keep it to 90 minutes today, about 45 minutes talking, and then we'll do 45 minutes question and answer section. I know you guys have questions. Please keep the questions for the second half of this episode so we can, finish our talking and then we'll get to the questions. So with that, let me see if I can find the right button here. And Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
Awesome. We're going to have an awesome another episode of our show. And of course, today we will talk about foreign technology at Area 51. And no, we are not talking about UFOs. We are talking about actual Russian and possibly even Chinese hardware that they play with at Area 51. And I know you dedicated over 50 pages in your book to that subject, so you know probably more than anybody else on the outside about what is going on there in terms of foreign material evaluation, and we'll hope to talk about that a little bit. So let's start with maybe the history and how they got into that business and how all that came all about.
Well, sure. That Foreign Materiel Exploitation, or FME, is one of the biggest and longest running programs at Area 51. And when I put my book together, I made sure to include not just one chapter, chapter 5, but also another section in chapter 9, which gets into the more recent stuff. I'm having some audio things where I'm hearing.
Yeah, your audio is cutting in and out.
Yeah. I'm getting some strange stuff going on over here.
Ooh, Men in Black.
Did it go away?
I think it looks better. Let's try this again. Do you have anything else running on your computer that's using bandwidth, possibly?
I didn't think so.
Okay, no, you're good right now.
Okay, well, if you're not hearing anything unusual, then I'll just continue. The history of examining foreign military aircraft, goes all the way back to World War I, of course, and continued to World War II, because we wanted to examine what the enemy's capabilities were as far as their military hardware. In 1961, Air Force Systems Command established the Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Uh-oh, now you're frozen.
Uh-oh.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're back.
Because I am hearing things that I have said a few minutes ago showing up now, and I don't know why I'm hearing them.
Okay, that sounds like a feedback. I don't
Yes.
know where that would be coming from. Do you have by any chance the YouTube channel open that you're playing that episode?
Yeah, that's the problem. Okay, now I think we're
Uh-huh.
good. All right, I'm ready to
Okay.
go. Sorry about the technical difficulties. So, so in 1961, the Foreign Technology Division was established to study these foreign pieces of military equipment, primarily from the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc. And in 1967, a program called Have Bridge was established. And that basically meant having someone as an on-call specialist, usually a test pilot and maybe some other technical people, so that they could do limited technical analysis of foreign military hardware as it became available. And that meant they would travel to other countries if something was found, if an airplane crashed or some component was captured or whatever. This was a very small project, but it eventually grew into something much bigger. And the big breakthrough was in 1968 when Project Have Donut was initiated. And that was the first time that a Soviet fighter plane was tested at Area 51. So the Israeli Air Force had managed to acquire a MiG-21 from an Iraqi defector in 1966 and had their test pilot do a lot of flight evaluations to find out how this airplane worked and how they could fight against it. And of course, the U.S. intelligence agencies were very eager to get their hands on that MiG-21. So they made a deal, and the MiG-21 was disassembled and brought to Area 51, where it was studied intensively by engineers as they put it back together, put instrumentation in it, and finally let the test pilots have an opportunity to fly it. So we had two kinds of evaluations. There was a technical evaluation, and that was done by Air Force Systems Command pilots, primarily to see what capabilities the aircraft had, how it was made, how it operated, what its operating performance characteristics were, limitations, and then the tactical evaluation, which was done by the Tactical Air Command and also some elements of the U.S. Navy, to see how does it operate in combat, what are its vulnerabilities, how can you defeat it. And so the MiG-21 was flown against pretty much all the different types of combat aircraft we had in the inventory at the time. And the results of that were put into a training film, which was then shown to U.S. servicemen who would be dealing with the MiG-21 in actual combat. Because it would do nobody any good to get all these lessons and then not share them with the warfighters. And so the film that was put together was called Throw a Nickel on the Grass. And I put in a FOIA request some years ago to get that declassified. And so it is available. It's out there. It's probably on YouTube for all I know.
Awesome.
Very, very interesting film because, they present the idea of, what would it be like if you could actually get your hands on a real live MiG-21? But that would be impossible, wouldn't it? And then they show that, no, it's not impossible. We've done it. So in 1969, through pretty much the same sort of process, we got a hold of two MiG-17s, which are very maneuverable, Eastern Bloc fighter, another contemporary of the MiG-21. And I should note that both the MiG-17 and MiG-21 were the primary adversary aircraft that our forces were facing in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. And at that time, the kill ratio was not in our favor. At best, we were kind of breaking even, and sometimes we were losing more planes than they were. So the MiG-17s were also put through the technical and tactical evaluations. And the lessons learned were passed on to the warfighters, which helped change the air war in Southeast Asia in a very fundamental way. Now, some of the other interesting little tidbits, this was all done in secret at Area 51. It's supposed to be completely classified. Within a year of that first test in the half donut MiG-21, Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine was already reporting on it. Yeah, because when you start sharing that information with lots of people in the military, it's going to leak out eventually. When they were testing the aircraft, they needed to keep a lot of records, including the pilot's personal flight logs, maintenance records, all these different kinds of things, which were unclassified. And you couldn't just put MiG-21 in unclassified records, so they had to come up with a different designation. And prior to that, the McDonnell Phantom II, when it was the F4H1, that was the Navy designation. The Air Force version was going to be called the F-110 Spectre, and the prototype was the YF-110A. Well, that all got changed when the designation system was revamped, and so those numbers, the 100 series numbers, all went away. So these guys working on Have Donut said, we need to call our plane something. We need a designation that has never been used and will never be used. So they called the MiG-21 the YF-110B. And that was their unclassified designation for it. When the MiG-17s came, those were projects Have Drill and Have Ferry. I'm not sure why they gave the two aircraft different nicknames. But they also gave them different designations as well, because the Air Force Form 5, personal flight record, didn't have any provision for tail numbers. So one of the MiG-17s was called a YF-113A, and the other was called a YF-114C. And it's kind of important to note that none of these designations were in any kind of sequence. They not a numerical sequence, not an alphabetical sequence. They were just kind of random, and I think that was very intentional, because if anyone ever saw these designations on the forums, it wouldn't mean anything. So those programs went along pretty well. In 1970, they'd given back the original MiG-21, one of the MiG-17s, back to Israel. But we still had a MiG-17 at Area 51, and they began to look at the possibility of getting more airplanes. The new project had kind of an overarching name called Have Glib, and that would be used for a variety of different aircraft under test. But to begin with, it was just a single MiG-17. Another project that took place in 1970 involved sending a test pilot who'd worked on the earlier programs. They sent him to Vietnam to fly a Cambodian MiG-17. It was actually a J-5A, the Chinese copy of the MiG-17. And so he traveled to Phuket Air Base in Vietnam, and a Cambodian pilot brought the plane in and let the test pilot fly it a bit. Because he flew those missions in Southeast Asia, he got to log them as combat missions, even though they weren't really technically combat missions. And so Have Glib continued in 1971. They got some more aircraft, another MiG-21, 1972. The MiG-21 that had been used in Have Donut came back. They got a MiG-17 PF, which is the one with the radar in the nose. So the program was growing. And that was another thing that was important, because now you needed more personnel to maintain the aircraft, fly the aircraft. And so in 1973, the program was enlarged and renamed again. It became Have Idea. And so they had these plans. But the pilots flying them were doing it on kind of an additional duty basis in their spare time. It wasn't a continuous effort. It was just whenever they could get it done. Obviously, the Air Force Systems Command saw it as a very valuable program and kept supporting it with funding. And the intelligence community was getting more hardware from overseas, airplanes, radars. Some of the radar systems that are now located north of Groom Lake are things that were acquired from Israel, and later later wars in the Middle East, as well as some simulators of those types of Eastern Bloc systems. Up to this point, the test pilots doing the flying of the assets had been drawn from the Special Projects Branch of the 6512th Test Squadron at Edwards Air Force Base. And because the program was growing in size and also complexity and the responsibilities, the commander of the Air Force Flight Test Center finally said, this should be an actual squadron. We should finally just make this a squadron, because the chain of command was out of alignment. The guys who were working at Area 51 couldn't actually tell the commander of the 6512 what they were doing. It was just a really strange sort of situation. So in 1977, it became the 6513th Test Squadron. And they've been calling themselves the Red Hats since 1973. And so that was the name that the 6513th got, the Red Hats. And pretty much describes what they were doing, since they were essentially flying the communist bloc aircraft.
Well, they were
So
also really living the lifestyle, I hear, of like they were almost living like Russians at Area 51. Or is that an exaggeration? That is.
Well, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but they were learning how to fly Russian tactics in simulated air combat.
Okay.
And around this time, the Tactical Air Command guys who'd been doing tactical evaluations, they had a much more ambitious idea, and that was to create a squadron of Soviet MiGs and fly them against our aircraft for training. Now, the lessons learned from the Red Hats projects up to this point informed some of the schools that developed. Top Gun, which is a Navy school at Miramar near San Diego, and of course the Red Flag at Nellis Air Force Base. But they were not allowed to fly the MiGs because the MiGs were all secret, so they were using surrogate airplanes like the F-5. The F-5E was a pretty good surrogate to stand in for a MiG-21 or potentially even a MiG-17, because it was small, it was maneuverable, it was fast. But it's not the same thing as flying against a MiG, but they did their best. They flew Russian tactics, they operated like a Soviet squadron. And finally, though, the command, Tactical Air Command said, we're going to fund Project Constant Peg, which involved building a new airfield at Tonopah Test Range for the Tactical Air Command guys, and they were the Red Eagles. So you had the Red Hats and the Red Eagles. And they started off with the designation 4477th Test and Evaluation Flight. A flight is smaller than a squadron, but they quickly built up into realistically larger than a squadron. But they ended up being called the 4477th Test and Evaluation Squadron. And the Red Eagles got some MiG-17s, a couple of them. They had MiG-21s, eventually quite a few. And finally, they got some MiG-23s of various models. And they flew these against more than 6,000 U.S. airmen from the late 1970s up through 1988, when the program was eventually defunded towards the end of the Cold War. But it was just an amazing program. So just to show a few interesting things, here's some patches. We got the Red Hats and the original Red Eagles, 4477 TEF, and their later thing. The Red Hats, meanwhile, were still doing their technical evaluations at Groom Lake. Throughout the 1980s, they were acquiring more different models, MiG-21s, MiG-23s, Su-22s, and things like that, just a variety of different aircraft, and testing them out. And they did run into a problem in the spring of 1984 when General Bobby Bond came out from Air Force Systems Command, and he wanted to take a couple flights in a MiG-23. Well, they didn't have any two-seaters, so They trained him up as best they could, and he made 2 orientation flights on his own, solo, in the MiG-23. And on the second one, he lost control and crashed the aircraft and died. And so this was very bad. And this may have led to the first significant kind of reorganization of the Red Hats, because a few years later, in 1986, Have Idea was replaced with Have Phoenix, which kind of gives you that rising out of the ashes, returning from the flames kind of feeling. And so that continued for a long time. And I'm not sure if that's still the name they use or if it's become something else, because it just changes time after time. The 6513th Test Squadron was inactivated in 1992, and immediately its assets and personnel were activated as the 413th Flight Test Squadron. This was part of a massive reorganization of the entire Air Force. And so they had wanted to keep some version of their original patch, just changing the designation on it. But the new Chief of Staff of the Air Force had a whole bunch of new rules and regulations, and because they were the 413th, and he was preserving the heritage and honors of certain organizations, they ended up using the old 413th patch, which dated back to World War II, and so they became the Bombcats, which I think that took some getting used to. But interestingly, even after that changeover, the organization at Groom Lake continued to maintain its Red Hats identity. Somehow that continued and eventually seemed to split off from the 413th somehow, because the 413th itself was inactivated in 2004. And by that time, it had become involved more with electronic warfare. So, that was a whole different thing altogether. But the program has been very active in more recent years. People have spotted MiG-29s, Su-27s, and other things flying over Groom Lake in that area. So we know that that's continuing, and I've heard from other sources that it's continuing as well. There was a fatal accident in 2017 that took the life of the Red Hats commander at the time, Dr. Schultz. Someone made a patch to memorialize him. That led to some significant reorganization. There had been some talk that the Red Hats would be disbanded, but what I've heard and what makes more sense is that it was just significantly reorganized in some way. I don't know exactly what that means, whether it was put under the National Air and Space Intelligence Center or some other thing, but it's still a thing. They are still somehow active. And the Red Eagles, even though Project Constant Peg was canceled in 1988, some of the remaining pilots were transferred to the Red Hats to maintain currency in the MiG-23. And after a short time, the Red Eagles were reborn, first as a detachment of the 57th Wing, and later the 53rd Test and Evaluation Group, which they are today. And the Red Hats, they've had some newer designs for their patches as well, but they're still apparently around. And the Navy has always been involved with both Red Hats and Red Eagles. They've had people embedded with both, starting with the VX-4 squadron from Naval Air Station Point Mugu, and subsequently VX-9 Det Nellis. So naval interest still continues. It is a significant program. It's been reported at the highest levels of government and briefed to a lot of important people, and presumably the funding for that has remained strong.
Well, and that ties in with the recent sighting in those high-res photos that we published on Dreamland Resort a couple months ago. You can actually see F-18s probably from VX-9 at China Lake at Area 51 on that ramp that is thought to be the Red Hat's home. So
I
I
would
think that
I would
ties it all
say
together.
that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. That is definitely where those airplanes are from. No
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, they they may not only be using Russian hardware but also some of their stuff. And I can see the VX9, or I can hear the VX9 call signs in radio traffic sometimes. They don't even really make a big deal of hiding anything. They just use their home call signs that are pretty much associated with VX9
Sure.
and fly in the ranges here. So,
And one of the photographers caught a picture of an F-16 two-seater flying through a canyon a few years back, and one of the pilots was wearing a Red Hats patch on his flight suit, and the other had a Red Eagles patch on his suit. So, that was interesting too. I don't think they realize people have such good camera lenses. They catch little details like that.
yeah,
But the mission that they have is still both technical and tactical evaluation of these assets, and they do things like flying the aircraft to their limits, finding out their performance characteristics and limitations, their military utility, testing weapon systems, avionics, all of that stuff, and that gives us a huge advantage in combat because a lot of these airplanes are exported to allies of Russia and China and things like that, and some of the planes that China flies is the same kind that Russia flies. And of course, the People's Republic of China is the pacing threat that we're looking at primarily today.
yeah, that's actually a good question that I wanted to ask you. Do you think they have Chinese planes at their disposal by now?
That is a very good question, and I wonder that frequently. Um, if they have, I've not seen them yet, or I don't know of anyone who's caught any pictures. So I'm certain it's this kind of thing they're very interested in, and it's gotten to be a very challenging environment now because you look at some of the news reports and you see how many new advanced fighter planes that the People's Republic of China is fielding and testing. I keep seeing like a new fighter about every other month, it seems, and that bomber prototype they had a few months ago. It's just crazy. So I think there's a lot of interest from the intelligence community in that.
Yeah, and some of the information that comes out of China, I can't help but think is disinformation to just make people over here scratch their heads. But yeah, I think some of it is really worth looking at, and I'm sure if they don't have them already, hardware. And what's interesting is,
Surprised.
you mentioned it briefly that they not only evaluate Russian jets, but they also evaluate Russian radar systems. And some of those systems were actually located just inside the back gate, very visible for visitors at the back gate, and they have all been removed now. So one could make an argument that, okay, they maybe got newer systems that they really don't want people to see, and they moved them further into the ranges in the northern Emigrant Valley that is not visible from anywhere on public land.
That's certainly possible, and I think also having those radar systems close to the gate like that, where everybody could see them, became kind of an attractive nuisance because it brought the tourists to see those systems. So if you push them back behind the hills, now you don't have that problem as much anymore. And of course, with Google Earth, you can look on the satellite imagery and try to find out where all the different radar systems are. Uh, there's a vast variety of different systems, not just close to Groom Lake, but also up near Tonopah Test Range at Site 4. So you've got quite a variety up there as well.
Yeah, and those systems, unfortunately, they haven't released a new satellite image since those sites disappeared. But I'm pretty sure the next satellite image that comes out is going to show a lot more sites in Emigrant Valley with those systems or with other systems. I mean, the systems that they had here at the backgate were decades old. I mean, that was
Right.
old stuff that they used to, it was used for red flag and also for some of the groom stuff but it certainly wasn't their highest grade stuff that they had. And the good stuff they've always had in Immigrant Valley. Like you said, the whole valley is littered with sites, with radar sites. And the interesting stuff certainly would be in that area.
It includes everything from long-range tracking radars to the kind of radar systems that you associate with surface-to-air missiles and other threat systems like that.
Yeah, and all across the ages, I think the oldest system is from the 50s. They have the Tall King.
Right.
That's west of Papoose Mountain. It's been
Right.
sitting
Yeah.
there since I mean, T.D. Barnes talks about it when he was out there in the 60s, they had it. So, I guess they just, maybe we'll use it later on, so we'll just leave it there. And
Right. I don't know if they still use it or not, but it was certainly back when Project Oxcar was going on. The Tall King radar was one of the ones they were particularly interested in with regard to the A-12. The A-12's low observable characteristics, its anti-radar features, were designed with the Tall King in mind because the Soviets were using the Tall King for long-range tracking, and so they wanted to make Oxcart as invisible to it as they could manage with the technology they had at the time.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And that, I mean, I think all the generations of stealth are mirrored in some way by the radar systems that they have developed to counter it. Now, getting you to, I'm going to try and get you to speculate a little bit here. We
Okay.
recently had this drone crash here that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, just to briefly touch on it. Now, do you think that they actually have any foreign drones that they might be playing with at this point?
I would not be at all surprised because so many drones have been expended in Ukraine, for example. And so I'm sure the number of those have been recovered intact or relatively intact enough that they could be either repaired or reverse engineered. So yeah, I would not be at all surprised if they got their hands on some of those.
Yeah, and they're probably obviously smaller, so they're easier to transport and to acquire. So I would think, I mean, that seems to be the next big thing, and also communication. A while ago, I don't know if you are following this discussion in my discussion forum on Dreamland Resort. There's a site that is kind of tucked away in a canyon. You can see two concrete pads, and there was a lot of discussion what these pads were for. And I think the consensus eventually was that it was for a system that was evaluating Russian radar systems. And actually, and I'm hoping I can get this together properly, that we were actually developing a technology injecting a virus through the radar system into the Russian networks. And there was speculations that that may have been that might have been developed for that kind of a mission.
Yeah, again, this is something that wouldn't surprise me because a considerable amount of the technology is being developed for cyber warfare. We've seen such a real change in the way wars are fought between you've got all the development of drones, long range missiles of different kind, small bombs, small missiles, very small drones, the kind that you can get commercial off the shelf hobby type drones and then turn them into weapons. And so there's been also a huge focus on cyber warfare, jamming systems, viruses, hacking into networks, because network-centric warfare is one of the other buzzwords we've heard in recent years. So yeah, this is a really different arena from what it was back in the 60s and 70s and even the 80s and 90s. It's changed so much in just the last few decades.
Yeah, and the making it hacking proof. Who would have thought that we would see drones that have long cables that they're dragging behind them to be hacking proof? I mean,
Right.
It's, whatever works. And apparently from what we hear in the media here is that the fields over there are littered with these cables that fall off of the drones after they are deployed and expended. Who would have thought that something like that would ever be a thing? Or, just to briefly touch on that before we get to the drone crash here, they apparently, and there's good evidence for that, they are working on using light laser pulses for communication now, for secure
Right.
communication.
Yes.
So they're tracking this plane with some kind of ground-based laser, I guess. I mean, there's not a lot of information, so I'm just really making stuff up here. How would I do that? And basically have a like a fiber optics link, except there's no fiber optic in the middle. There's just air, and you got the transmitter and receiver on both sides. And of course, if you're not in the line of sight of those of that light path, you can't monitor or inject malicious data
Right.
into it.
Yeah, and a great deal of effort is being expended in finding ways to defeat drones, whether anything from high-tech jamming systems to very low-tech. I mean, throw a net up in the air. Or one guy in Ukraine flew a small plane and just literally flipped the drone with his wingtip and knocked it out of the sky. I mean, that's, it's just crazy.
Yeah, whatever works, and we are really at a crossroads, or at a new technologies emerging so fast that I don't think they can quite keep up with the technology how we counter this. And as it happens, without getting into politics here, but as it happens, Ukraine is really becoming a world leader in drone technology and in counter drone technology now. So I mean, I'm sure all that stuff is already being played with at Area 51. And, they say it's 30 years ahead of its time, ahead of what we consider state of the art. I mean, think about how fast things are moving. 30 years from now, who knows what they're playing with right now?
It really is moving quickly. The kinds of electronics, quantum computing. There's just so much. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah, the whole next generation air dominance project
Right.
with AI taking over a lot of duties that the pilot would ordinarily have, and basically leaving the pilot free to do higher level tasks, to focus more on the overview of the battle space and the bigger picture. And that is maybe even old stuff in Area 51 already. Who knows? I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And getting to that before we start taking some questions in a few minutes, getting to that drone crash. I know you don't have any more information than what the media says, but you probably have some thoughts on that, what it could mean. What I did know, what happened that night, there was a very large mission here that had electronics assets, and I was monitoring that on radio traffic. I didn't see any of it. It was at night. I'm listening to the radio traffic here. There was several flights of drones with call signs that I've never really heard before. They were obviously drones. There was several electronic assets. There were several tankers. There were F-18. I'm sorry. There were FA-18Gs, growlers in the air. There was jets in the air. There was something out of Groom in the air. This was all. I mean, one of the biggest missions I've ever heard in the ranges here, happening in the 70s, in the 60s, in the Groom airspace, in the NTS airspace. The whole area was buzzing with activity. And then, of course, all of a sudden, and it was very unusual. I mean, you have I know what it sounds like when somebody flies against the radar, the RCS range, or when there's weapon school stuff going on. It was unlike anything. The closest I can say is it sounded a little bit like Black Flag, the new Black Flag exercise,
Sure. Right.
basically
Yeah.
red flag for black projects.
Right.
And all of a sudden, knock it off, and people were like, "What happened? What happened?" We're told to RTB, and I didn't hear any I wasn't monitoring the emergency channels, so there might have been a transmission on those. But on the mission channels, it was just okay, guys, we're done, go home. And so they went into their respective bases. And then, of course, I heard Groom Security talking about a drone crash. At first, they said we have an asset down, then lockdown of the base. Nobody gets in and out. That was verbatim what they said. Everybody stays in place. Couple of units were dispatched to meet with a certain person in a certain hangar. I don't want to be more specific than that. Yeah. Um, and then, of course, what crashed is a drone, an unmanned vehicle with ordnance on board. And then the search and recovery started. They saw flames and went to the site. So this was something that I have good reason to believe was in some way connected to Area 51. Now, of course, we have this whole thing, the media going wild with FBI investigation into drone crash from the crazy story that we probably have all read, that they cleared the site, everybody moved out, they recovered the crashed aircraft. I drove in the afternoon after they moved out, found what turns out to be, I thought it was a crash site, it turns out to be the staging area. Somebody else, the video is also on my website, somebody else found the actual crash site. And but there was just, and then they come up with this crazy story. Somebody planted a practice bomb on the site.
Yeah, but I never
Okay,
saw any pictures of that. Did you?
I certainly did not. Good point. And so,
I never. I
what's your
I heard
take on
that
all of
story.
this?
Never saw any pictures of that. So I don't know if that has any basis in reality or it was just somebody making something up.
Well, it is in an official Air Force communication, an official Air Force statement that is published on the Creech Air Force Base website. They say it was a drone from, I forgot the unit, at Creech Air Force Base. That unit flies Reapers and also RQ-170s. And then they go on into this crazy that they had recovered, that they had cleared the site, and then somebody maliciously planted a practice bomb at some old aircraft debris piece. And the FBI is looking into that. Now, what is the FBI doing? The crash site was, maybe they can get somebody for littering, but that's all I can think of.
Right. And again, without a picture, it's really hard to say because they say somebody planted a practice bomb. Okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean, you can, at a surplus store, you can buy a cheapo, casing of a practice bomb that weighs 20 pounds, and that's easy enough to plant. But if it's a real practice bomb, it's going to weigh, maybe 500 pounds. It's hard to imagine anybody putting that out there. So again, no pictures, no way to analyze that story.
Yeah, well, and it is not easy to get to the site. I was in my pickup truck, which is a little unwieldy in that terrain. I did not make it all the way to the staging area. I was looking at a very steep drop and a very steep climb out of a wash, and I said, "This is not going to work. I'm going to get high centered on that uphill."
Right.
So I hiked the rest. So if I don't see how anybody could have trucked something in unless they had a very truck that is made for that kind of terrain. But number one, why would anyone do that? And number two, why would the Air Force care enough to get the FBI and OSI involved?
Yeah, I don't know. Sounds very suspicious.
But would you like, you don't have to if you don't want to speculate, would you like to, or would you care to speculate at all about what it might have been, what that mission might have been all about? I know it's difficult from the distance.
Right. Again, I didn't hear any of the radio transmissions, but it sounds like it was a very large operation there, and maybe interoperability of manned and unmanned assets together, demonstrating, warfare of that type. beyond that, I can't really speculate.
Yeah, well, that's thanks, and I respect that. Uh, that was kind of my thought. Maybe not necessarily the NGAD in action, but maybe something precursor to. Well, let's see how these systems work together, and then we'll see how these systems work together, and eventually we'll tie it all together. But it could have been one of those tests where they were testing certain systems in conjunction with manned assets.
Sure, because a lot of the new combat philosophy involves cooperative combat aircraft. So you've got the manned assets augmented by basically UAVs, the probably armed UAVs and jamming UAVs and other different kind of things like that. So yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I wasn't in Rachel for a while, for a couple of weeks. I am back in Rachel now, and I can promise you guys listening out there, I will go back there. I have a metal detector. I have a Geiger counter. I am armed and dangerous. No, don't. No, I am armed with a metal detector and a Geiger counter. I don't want anyone to get this wrong. But I will go back out to the site, and I will do my best to uh, figure out little more pieces to the puzzle, and of course, post them here on YouTube. So, well, I think it's over 45 minutes. We should take some questions. I
Sure,
know
sounds
people out
good.
there have questions. I haven't really been able to pay much attention to the chat here, but folks, go ahead and ask your questions for Peter. I'm going to read them to Peter. He doesn't see the chat on his display. My producer has something. Okay. Yes, yes, live chat. I got it. Live chat. That was Linda reminding me to turn something on that I always forget. Got it covered. Uh, all right, here we go. Aircraft expeditions. Question for Peter. Have you ever been privy to any bombers being tested at Groom Lake? Also, have you uh, heard or known of any cyber warfare facilities at Groom?
I definitely know that Groom and Tonopah are involved with cyber warfare. I don't know anything at all about the systems, but I know that they have organizations that do that mission, and that's been ongoing for a great many years, and I'm sure it will continue into the future for quite a while. As far as bombers tested out there, it's interesting. You look at so many of these declassified projects from the past, and there aren't any bombers. There was something apparently tested in 1983. Frank Burke supposedly made several flights in an advanced technology demonstrator of some kind. And I know he was a bomber guy. He had flown F-111s, B-1, later the B-2. So I've often wondered if that might have been bomber related. I've never been able to find out what it is. I talked to one person who was out there who said, hey, I was responsible for the money at that time out there. I was there. I would have known about this. And I don't remember this project. Of course, he was telling me this, decades later. So he might not have remembered. Um, but it remains kind of a mystery to this day. I don't know what the plane was called, just that it was, supposedly an advanced technology demonstration vehicle of some kind.
Yeah, on the subject of bombers, we have the B-2 that is occasionally recertified at Area 52, Area 51 at the RCS range. There's
That's
even
that's true.
video of one of
That's
those
true. And in
flights.
fact, the first time I ever went out to Chicaboo Peak, and this was like I want to say 1993. I saw the B-2 flying around over Groom Lake, doing orbits, undoubtedly going through the RCS range.
Yeah, yeah, I hear them a lot. There's about a handful of call signs. I have them all on the website, and I hear those call signs a lot when they do their certification. Okay, here we got trigger treats with ex-Moldovan MiG-29s and ex-Ukrainian Su-27s showing up in museums in recent years. Is that a sign that those ops at Groom have ended?
Well, I do know that at one point, back in 2017 and before that, they had two-seat Su-27s, Su-27UB. One of those crashed in 2017, and the other one is now in the U.S. Air Force Museum in Ohio. I went and saw that recently. And I don't know if there have been any recent sightings of those planes or the MiG-29s. Those seem to be appearing in museums more, and maybe they aren't testing those. Maybe they've got something newer or something else. I just don't know.
Well, I mean, they might. I think it's a fair assumption that, okay, if they show up in a museum, they got to come from somewhere. And maybe Groom just doesn't need them anymore. So they, just like the various prototypes, the Tacit Blue and others, all of a sudden they showed up in a museum, and well, we didn't need them anymore. So we put it in a museum, and oh, we didn't tell you about that. Sorry, here it is.
Well, I'd rather see it go to the museum than get buried in a deep hole, which they threatened to do with Tacit Blue, but fortunately that got rescued. I have heard from time to time that they might put one of the senior prom cruise missile prototypes in the museum, but then it never shows up. And I mean, I've been hearing that rumor for years, so I don't know what happened with that.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question from JJ, and I'm not certain I know what that expression means. Do you think it was a Bay Raktar that crashed in Tikaboo Valley recently? I'm not familiar with that.
Sure, I know that it's a type of drone, and actually, that would not surprise me at all. That was one of the things that I thought about when I first heard the story. It's a type of drone that's been used a lot in Ukraine and elsewhere in recent years. So yeah, wouldn't be surprised.
Interesting. I need to read up on that. I'm not familiar with that. There's so much new stuff and so little time. So I definitely will read up on that. We got a question from James. Do you know if a president has ever visited Area 51?
I don't believe so. There have been a number of VIP visitors. George H.W. Bush went out there when he was the director of the CIA and got to check out the Red Hats operation. And it's hard to get a president out to a place like that. You can, theoretically do it, but because he travels with a large entourage and the press and stuff like that, it's often difficult to slip away to do a side trip.
Yeah,
maybe not possible, but I don't have any confirmation that's ever happened.
Yeah, and it certainly wouldn't be that the president wakes up one morning and says, okay, today I'm going to Area 51. There would have to be a need to know or some kind of a reason for them to go out there. Pete Hexet recently visited Area 51. We have documented that through the Dreamland Resort website and also through this channel. And sure enough, the week after he visited Area 51, the NGAD project got a lot more funding all of a sudden, and the F-35 funding was cut down. So apparently he liked what he saw, but there was a reason for him to go there. It wasn't like he just, okay, today I'm going to go out to Area 51. So I think even the President of the United States has to have a good reason to visit, and I doubt that he can just say, okay, now open all the hangars. I want to look in all the hangars. That's just not going to happen.
I mean, maybe he can, but it's probably not a good idea just because it's very disruptive.
Yeah, well, yeah, they would have to hide a lot of stuff. And so, okay, well, this aircraft expeditions, I'm sure he's not serious about that. Was Independence Day filmed at Area 51? Of course not, but it's a great movie.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think they filmed some of that at El Mirage Dry Lake, if I remember right, in
yeah,
California.
I think I heard about that. Yeah, that would have been interesting to watch the production. And of course,
Yeah,
Groom Lake, for someone who's never been out here, probably looks very close, but it just isn't like that. You drive across a dry
sure.
lake bed, and all of a sudden you're in Area 51. You get to the perimeter long before then, and that's a lot. I always tell people it's not like in the X Files where Mulder hops over the fence and is right at the
Right.
Area 51 runway, and the secret thing takes off right there and there. It just doesn't work that way. All right. Yeah, okay. Looks like there's some conversation going on about Chicaboo and question for Peter. Personal request: would you sign my Dreamland copy? Aircraft Expeditions. You know
Sure.
that. Well, I guess he would have to somehow get it to you, and
Yeah, I've had people send me copies of the book with return postage so I can get it back to them, and I even did that for somebody in Australia. So you know, looks like the book's getting around a lot.
yeah, I got my copy of that heavyweight sitting right here, still waiting for you to come over here and sign it for me, if you would. I hope to somehow
Right.
catch up with you in person here again.
And in the conversation we were having before we started the program, I mentioned that I'd been contacted by a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who had purchased my book, and he said it was recommended to him by someone who had uh, been an assistant to a prior head of AFOSI special projects. So um, it's interesting. Some of the people who recommend that my book is worth reading. I'm always glad to hear that. It's very heartening.
That's awesome. That is really, I mean, what better reference could you get for your book? I mean, that
Well,
is,
I've had former commanders of Det 3 and other people who worked out there say, "Yeah, I love your book." And a former chief historian of the Air Force said it brought back a lot of good memories. So that's cool.
and it really is the book on Area 51. Anyone listening right now, if you want to learn all about Area 51, get that book. It's a heavyweight. And it's just filled with information and presented very, very well. I can't tell you enough how impressed I am with the way you present that difficult subject and without redundancy, great facts, great stories, and it's just to me when I picked up this book and I started reading it. I was stepping into Area 51 back in the days, and I was right there, and I was experiencing it through your book. It's just absolutely amazing.
One of the
So
things that was most important to me was to back up the entire text with source notes so that people could see that I'd really done my homework, and also so that they could see that I did not use any sensitive source material, that I was only using what was available as unclassified, declassified sources. So that was important because I didn't want any unpleasantness to arise from this.
good idea. And there are I don't know how many dozens of pages with source notes to that
There are
book. Is
47 pages of source notes.
wow. Okay, Stuart Mouse is listening again. Awesome. He said, "Gee, I wonder how the Redheads got to work from Edwards Air Force Base North Base to Groom Lake."
Yeah, back in the 70s, um, the North Base facility, or part of it at least, became available, and the Red Hats set up their headquarters there because, as I said, um, testing the MiGs was a part-time additional duty basis. So the rest of the time, they had their North Base headquarters, and that is what started that commuter traffic between North Base and Groom Lake that we still see today, because that's kind of become the interface between, kind of the liaison between Groom Lake and Edwards. You can use that secure facility. I was able to visit the North Base secure compound back in the early 2000s, when it was the 413th Flight Test Squadron there. That was a kind of unique opportunity. They had to have you hand in your badge and trade it for a special badge to get in there, and then get escorted from place to place. And some of the offices within the building were their own separate vaults, and even getting over to the cafeteria required going through a badge gate. So it was kind of an interesting little place.
Yeah, yeah. I think they still use North Base these days for the beach Janets to
Yes, that
fly
absolutely.
into Edwards.
I used to see those fly in and out morning and afternoon. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question from Alan, one of my members, and thank you for your support, Alan. Uh, what's the info on borrowed Western NATO assets at Groom?
Borrowed NATO assets?
Borrowed Western and NATO
Like from,
assets at Groom. So are we? I, I'm not sure what he's. Are you asking, Alan? Are they reverse engineering our allies' stuff?
I'm sure that we have programs that involve our NATO allies, certainly. And I'm sure that allies that have access to adversary type hardware are funneling those to us as well. But that's
Yeah,
about as much as I can know or speculate.
we funny side note, we went through great trouble to get the MiG-29 to Area 51, and then all of a sudden the two Germanys became one, and the East German Air Force had a bunch of those, so they all
Right,
of a sudden they had a whole bunch of those at their
right.
disposal.
And that
Export
was how
borders, but still.
we got some of our early access to the MiG-29. We had some of our pilots go to Germany, and we had some of the Germans brought the MiG-29s to the United States, let our pilots fly them and test out the systems and the weapons. I talk a
Yeah,
little bit about the book.
it was absolutely crazy back then. I lived in Berlin when that happened, and you could literally drive in the countryside and you find Soviet army trucks parked by the side of the road, weapons, whatever you want, they had it, and for a few bucks, whatever wasn't bolted down, they would sell. So
Sure.
I'm sure that a lot of these MiG-29s were also available for the right price.
That's a lot like with the fall of the Soviet Union when it basically collapsed and became a Commonwealth of Independent States, and the whole Soviet system was dismantled, and they embraced capitalism in a way that essentially everything that wasn't bolted down, like you say, was for sale. A lot of
Hmm.
interesting Soviet military equipment was sold overseas to the West. Soviet space program hardware, pieces of Soyuz spacecraft, the Buran shuttle, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing when people all of a sudden they had to go home and they disposed of anything they could get their hands on. T. Hazard says he saw photos of B-52 at Area 51, and
Oh, sorry. No,
he
go
got
ahead. Let's do the question first.
uh, he
Photos of what at Area 51?
he saw photos of a B-52 at Area
Oh,
51.
sure,
I've
right.
never seen, as well as lots of old Area 51 pics that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
They
The B
whether
the
they
B
were evaluated, there's a whole different story, but they
yeah,
were
the
certainly
B
out there.
the B-52s, a couple of them were used for the for launching the D-21 drones
Right.
back in the late 60s. And so a couple of B-52H models were modified with a launch director station in place of a bombardier. And so they set up the wing pylons to carry the D-21 drone and its rocket booster, and flew those early tests out of Area 51 before moving the operation to Beale Air Force Base in Northern California.
Right.
So yeah, I was just about to. We were talking about Soviet space hardware, and so here's a piece of a heat shield from a Russian spacecraft. So this is used, by the way. It's a little bit charred.
You sure it's not radioactive or anything?
I am, yes. And their space shuttle was very similar to ours. So here's a tile. This is from Buran. This is
Wow.
actually a flown tile from the one and only orbital flight that the Buran shuttle made. A lot of tiles that you see are from the unflown orbiters that were left over after the program was canceled.
Now, do I dare ask how you got your hands on those?
Oh, eBay.
Really? Oh my God. Wow.
Right. Okay. Questions.
Okay, here's a good question from James. Have any other governments, other than the US government, tested anything at Area 51?
Yeah, I think the certainly the British have been involved in stuff, and I know there were joint U.S. British projects involving avionics systems with the 413th Flight Test Squadron, and one of those was called Ibis Dawn. Um, and there were some British pilots who came out to fly the F-117A in the early days when they were considering whether or not to buy stealth fighters. Ended up deciding not to. And there's probably a lot of stuff we don't know about.
Yeah, yeah. I think wasn't there at some point TD's talking about the squadron of in his days Japanese that were at Area 51. I don't recall
Oh,
the exact
no, Taiwanese. They came out.
Taiwanese. Okay.
Yeah, the nationalist Chinese came out to learn how to fly the C-130 for missions penetrating deep into China to drop sensors near the nuclear test sites and things like that. So yeah, they came out and trained at Area 51. It was kind of interesting because they brought them in at night and tried to keep them away from the rest of the base population. It's probably impossible to keep that completely secret, but they isolated them to some degree. And during one of the briefings, one of the Taiwanese.
Oh, looks like we lost Peter. Oh, he must have said something somebody didn't like and they cut the line. Uh, yep,
We'll
he is
do now.
frozen. Okay, there he is again.
I'm
We
back.
just lost you. We just
Okay,
lost you briefly. You're good. You're good.
sorry. Okay, good. So, what
Okay,
other
so
questions do we?
Mr. GP3PO, an old timer who's been with Dreamland Resort for a long time, do you think all that public interest in Area 51 may eventually result in a new site being developed?
Well, the thing about Area 51 is that it is a unique asset in that you have the dry lake bed, which you can't just find a very isolated dry lake bed anywhere. It's in a perfect spot. It's already within a large test range. It's roughly the size of Switzerland. The range is fully instrumented. There's all the telemetry, the communications, the support infrastructure. You know, it would be very, very difficult and extremely expensive to try to move to a new location, one that's more remote than this. And security is pretty darn tight around Groom Lake and Tonopah. So they obviously don't like people like us who speculate about what's going on or who listen to their radio communications or look with our binoculars or cameras or whatever. But we're not really getting probably even a fraction of the kind of information that would be useful to anyone as an adversary.
Yeah, and that's what I always hold against when people say I'm spying or what we do or as a group we're spying on anything. If foreign governments rely on us poking around Area 51 and listening to radio traffics, then their intelligence really isn't working. So uh, I think they know a lot more than we ever will know, and we just really don't want to know things to that extent. We're just curious citizens that just want to lift that veil a little bit and take a peek underneath, and that's all we are concerned with.
Sure.
And to some degree, I think though there is something to it. That drone facility at Yucca Lake, that is right smack in the middle of the test site where you can't see it from anywhere. It's inside the same test range, but it's a new facility that might have otherwise been tested at Area 51, but they chose to put that stuff in a location that is even more secluded from public eyes. And so, that
Right.
may have, one of the reasons for that may have been that, it's just they can do stuff there all day long without having to worry about people on Tikaboo and so forth spying
Sure.
on them.
I remember back in the early 2000s, Lockheed Martin announced that they had been flying this new, demonstration UAV called the Polecat. And of course, news media asked, well, where did you fly this thing? And they just kind of said vaguely, oh, we tested it on a remote range somewhere. So, initially there was speculation that it had been tested at Groom Lake, and that's a natural thing to speculate. But Lockheed Martin also released some pictures and a little bit of video, and it was not hard to figure out that it had been tested at Yucca Flat. So that was kind of the first window into the fact that Yucca Flat was being used for these UAV tests. And subsequently, of course, we saw the satellite pictures, the aerial photos that shows how they built up that little base. And that's really quite fascinating. As you say, it's right in the middle of all that range area. And so it's really, really difficult for anyone to see what's going on there.
Yeah, and it's even when you do the test site tours, for those that don't know, the public can actually do tours. You have to register and then you get into a bus. You can't take any cameras with you of any sort, but you do get to see some of the test site and you drive by the Yucca Lake bed on the other side of where the landing strip is. And at one occasion, when I did that tour, I asked the tour guide what may that facility be on the far side of the lake bed. And the answer that I got was, what facility? And that was the end of that. So he knew I knew, and uh,
Sure.
that was that. Jason, this is a statement. I think he says there's a video online of Heater Heatley doing MiG work at Groom, and he was exposed to have blue and had to be read into the program, 1978 or thereabouts.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there were times when some personnel were inadvertently exposed to seeing things like have blue or tacit blue that they weren't supposed to know about, and had to sign various papers saying that they would not talk about that. So they're probably really happy that those programs have since been declassified. Now they can talk about them at long last.
Yeah. Okay, Gary asks, with China building and flying new stealth aircraft, is it even worth it for the Red Hats to be flying non-stealth aircraft?
Well, yeah, absolutely, because these non-stealth aircraft are still being used, and not necessarily
Yeah.
if they're not being used in China, and they are being used in China, but they're also being used by a lot of allies of China and Russia and in the Middle East and places like that. So yeah, we still need to know what these different kinds of aircraft are like and how to fight against them.
Yeah, just like we still have a lot of F-15s, F-16s sitting around and using
Sure.
them, uh,
Right.
they still do too and use them, especially the countries, maybe not Russia or China, but countries that buy their hardware, they probably get hand-me-down stuff that,
Right.
the Russians wouldn't necessarily give them the first grade super stealth stuff. Uh, Black Eagle says, time to move on from the boomer Cold War mentality. Russia, US would be a powerhouse alliance. Europe is a dying civilization, and NATO should have been disbanded in the 90s. Okay, well, we don't want to get into politics here. Uh, I I'm trying to catch up on. Okay, let's see. I, I by coincidence, efficient RVer says, I by coincidence was on vacation and diverted to see the Russians themselves land MiG-29s for the first time in the US at Salinas Muni Airport.
Oh,
That's in California, I think.
yes, it is.
Huh, I'll be damned. Okay, let's see, where were we? This paging back and forth in the chat here is not very easy when there's a lot of questions. I hope I didn't miss anyone here. Okay, here we are. T. Hazar asks, were those drones originally for the SR-71? Yeah, the ones that you talked about, the D-21s.
Right. The D-21 was originally designed to be launched on top of essentially a modified A-12 called the M21, which had a second seat with a launch control officer. And the D-21 drone was mounted on a pylon on top of the aircraft. It was extraordinarily dangerous to launch the drone at Mach 3, which is what they had to do so that the ramjet engine on the drone would work. And during one of the tests, the drone collided with the mothership. Both vehicles were lost. One of the crew members died. So it was a lot safer to put it under the wing of a B-52, but then you needed the rocket engine to boost the D-21 drone to Mach 3 speed. So it became somewhat of a more complicated system in some ways, but was safer to operate. And then, of course, there were some tests. Some of them were successful, some of them were not particularly successful, and there were only about a handful of operational missions, none of which ever really produced any data. We lost a couple drones. One of them ended up in Russia. One of them ended up in China. Russia reversed engineered the D-21. I don't know if they ever built it or flew it, but they certainly came up with a reverse engineered model of it. And the one that China got is in their museum now.
Huh. Wow. Yeah, well, rubbing it in, I guess. Here, Tiahaza has another good question. Are there new stealth Black Hawks being housed at 51, built post Bin Laden raid?
That's an interesting question, because certainly, we saw evidence that there were stealth helicopters being used, and I can only imagine that in the years since they may have improved upon that design, but I have not seen anything personally.
On the subject of Black Hawks, did you see this bit about this cargo?
Yes.
That sounds like something, April 1st kind of a deal. I mean, who would build? Does it really make sense? That thing opens up front, and
Well, I guess it's a way to do it, and you don't put a crew in danger. You've just got basically a cargo pod in the form of a Black Hawk. So
I mean, somebody posted something in my forum, if that is supposed to be an April Fool's joke. I really had the same thought when I saw that thing. I mean, okay, a helicopter is not very fast, but do you really want to have the doors in the front where if the door latch fails, it opens and you get all the airflow inside the cargo area? It just doesn't seem like a good idea to me, but who knows? I'm sure it is. I mean, what do I know? But I'm just saying from where I'm sitting, I had to really read that article twice to believe it. Efficient RVer says eBay does have great stuff sometimes. That's in reference to your items there. We would speculate. Okay, let's see. No, I knew that was gonna happen. Jason mentions don't forget when open skies was happening, the Russians were allowed to overfly anywhere, including Groom. Uh, oh, I think Peter is frozen again.
Oh,
I'm not
what
sure.
did I? Am I frozen?
Okay,
I
you're good now. You're good now.
okay. Yeah, no. Yeah, I remember the Open Skies program. Obviously, the those missions were coordinated, so anything sensitive could be hidden away before the Open Skies platform flew over. But they were allowed to do that with prior arrangement.
And we were too overflying their
Yeah,
facilities,
sure.
which that ties in perfectly with a question from Stuart Moss. Do other countries have or had a foreign military exploration operations with acquired US equipment?
I've been waiting for that question all evening. Yes, they absolutely did. Remember, we abandoned quite a bit of military hardware in Vietnam, and a lot of those aircraft ended up in Russia. And certainly, uh, with the stuff we left behind now in Southwest Asia, Afghanistan, a lot of that material has been collected by various people who are, shall we say, not friendly to us, and I'm sure they exploited it to the best of their ability. So yes, absolutely, and it goes all the way back. World War II, the Germans and the Japanese acquired uh, Allied aircraft and studied them.
I think it's always a game of cat and mouse or whatever you want to call it,
Sure.
catching up with the other side. And we'd be kidding ourselves not to believe that the Russians and the Chinese are working as hard on our stuff as we are working on their stuff to figure it out. And so here, I know I'm not going to get that name, Magnoradel. I can't. I'm sorry, I cannot read the handle. It's a long word, and I would butcher it anyway. Forgive me for that. What are your thoughts on the recent sighting of a project seen at the Lockheed Martin radar cross-section testing facility captured by Uncanny Expeditions? What do you
Oh yeah,
speculate it may have been?
yeah, I did see that, and um, it it looked quite different from the previous video where somebody got some pictures at night of what was obviously an F-35 type fuselage. This looked different, and I don't know whether it was intended to be a model of an actual aircraft fuselage or if it was just a calibration shape or something else. But it was interesting. It was one of the most interesting things I've seen on a radar cross-section pylon.
He does great work, and his videos are always he's a little he's trying to sell his videos, and that's good. He's a little more dramatic than for my taste, but he
Sure.
does
Yeah.
great work. And the only thing, I mean, kudos to him for doing that and for going out there and doing what needs to be done and doing the stuff that we used to do 20, 25, 30 years ago.
Right.
I have a great respect for his work. What made me question is apparently that thing was out there for quite a while, and would they really leave something sensitive up there for so long?
Yeah.
But
That's
who
that's a
knows? I
fair
mean,
question.
they certainly knew that he was in the area. Security there is very tight. I was there over 20 years ago, and out of the blue, they caught on to us, and some loudspeaker voice, you know, made it very known that they were aware of our presence and not very happy with it. So
I
anyway,
I had I had a similar experience at the Gray Butte facility. McDonnell Douglas used to operate that, and sometimes let Lockheed and Northrop use it as well out in the California desert. And I happened to notice there was something interesting on the pylon, so I drove over there and went up by the fence and was trying to see what it was. And a security guard drove up and said, "You're not supposed to be here. Get out of here." And I mean, I was on public land, so but I said, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And off I went. But it was interesting to see, and I never did figure out what it was.
yeah, and they make it look this facility in the middle of the desert. There's nobody there, and it's so inconspicuous. And but they really know who's around there. They got sensors. They probably got the same road sensors that they have at Area 51 around there. and
Sure.
they know very well when somebody's approaching. So again, kudos to Uncanny Expeditions for doing that. Yeah, I always say anybody could have done it, but you did it, and kudos for that. So Sean Nas has some very nice words for Dreamland and my work and our work for researching Area 51. Thank you for that, Sean. And he also asks, is Hangar 18 also a repair station for Janet 737s? What's
Uh,
your thought on that?
that's a good question. Certainly could be used for that. It's a large general purpose hangar, and we've seen, I think, 737s parked near there occasionally. So could be used for that.
Well, it looks like from Michael's video, it's pretty clear that Rad 55 lives in Hangar 18.
Right. Right.
He saw it pretty much. He didn't get video of it taxiing in, but he caught it landing, and then seconds later, the doors open, then the doors close again. It's pretty clear that it went in there. So I think that's probably the most likely spot at Area 51 for such a large plane anyway.
Right.
There would really be only that one or the 2007 or 8 hangar that is a little bit at an angle to the rest of the base on the south end. But it's a logical place, but it's a big hangar, so they could very well have emergency repair. I don't think that it would be a regular maintenance hangars. You can regularly see the 737s flying to maintenance facilities,
Sure.
but emergency repairs, changing a tire or whatever they do on these planes, I'm sure they can do that in a hangar, in Hangar 18 or similar hangars at Groom.
I remember when Lockheed still had their operation at Burbank, and I was working there. And I used to see the Janet 737s fly in all the time. And one time they blew a tire and had to change it. So the plane was parked for a while on one of the executive ramps while the guys changed out the tire. I got some pictures of that.
Nice. Yeah, things happen, and a flat tire and you're grounded. Okay, one mean bean. Has any Ukrainian pilots gone up against red teams in F-16s around the range that you know of? In other words, have they, I guess, participated in red flag? I don't believe so. They got the real thing right now. I mean, they,
Yeah, that's true.
sadly, I don't recall Ukraine. I'd have to go back into the logs. I got logs going all the way back to 2001. Had they ever been at red flag? I really don't know. Good question.
Yeah, I
I'll
don't.
have to research that. Aircraft expeditions. Question for Peter. Other than what we already know about the reactivation of the F-117s, what other projects do you think the Nighthawk is up to as far as testing?
I don't know. The F-117s, I remember when they first got retired officially in 2008, and then very shortly afterward, people started seeing them flying around Tonopah Test Range. And for a long time, we didn't hear anything about it. And then suddenly, in recent years, they were all over the place as an adversary stealth aircraft and like that. I still wonder if they, are just doing the things that we see, or if it's like the A7s were back in the 80s at Tonopah, where they, were kind of a distraction from what was really happening with the F-117s, which at the time were secret. But
Yeah.
I just don't know.
Yeah, I think there is a very good chance that that's going on. They are certainly out and about all the time. This morning I heard one, and was it, oh, yesterday morning, today, I forgot. I heard one, and they even got their tail number to the tanker when they were refueling. Uh, and so they're not making a big secret out of it. Of course, right now they're flying out of Area 51 because TTR is still closed
Right.
for
Yeah.
runway construction. Uh, we are over the time. I think we're going to have to wind it down. I don't want to overstay my welcome with you or with your voice. I know that we pretty much said we're going to keep it an hour and a half. James has a question here that I can answer that. When was the last time we saw any new construction at Area 51? That would have been last year, or was it earlier this year, when they built those new shelters at the north ramp for
Right.
the F-16s, the Groom the F-16 interceptors that they have at Groom, and the chase planes. And that's also where they saw the VX-9 FA-18s parked in
Right.
those photos that are published on the website. So that was the last construction. And when you look over time, on average, every 2 years, a major new hangar is being built at Area 51. I mean, that's mind-blowing. The base is now 70 years old. This year, actually, it turned 70. And there's about 35 hangars, major hangars at Area 51. And I'm with you on your answer previously. The base is not going anywhere. It is so ideally situated that they will just build it up. If they have to, they will bounce or bump out the perimeter even further. But it's just so perfect that it's not going anywhere. And there's construction. Basically, actually, there's the northern taxiway was redone earlier this year, as you can see on these. What's that website called? Where you get current satellite images in low res quality.
Oh, yeah.
You can see that they are working on the taxiway. I mean, there's always stuff going on. I know there's a few more questions here, but we said we're going to keep it at an hour and a half. So I think we'll keep the rest of the questions for another time. I hope there will be a next time. I really enjoy these chats, and
Sure. Always happy to talk and happy to answer questions whenever possible.
I think we're going to have a lot more of these, and we'll get to everybody's questions. I'm sorry that we have to find an end today. Thank you so much, Peter, for doing this again. I mean, you are the authority on all of this, and I can't thank you enough for doing this for all of the people out there.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to go back to my camera here. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. I really have to make, we said we're going to do an hour and a half, and we'll want to keep it at that. There will be another time, next time. I'm thinking maybe doing this about a once a month thing. So until next time, I thank you all for watching. And if you like this stream, if you like what I do, subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up. And if you feel so inclined to support me, you can become a member for some extra stuff, some extra goodies, some extra info. Whatever the case may be, there will be a lot more to come. There will be more stuff about the drone crash that I'm hoping to publish this coming week. And there will be another live stream, a members only live stream this coming Friday, I believe. So there's a lot more stuff coming. I'm just getting started. Thank you for tuning in. And with that, I will give you our great theme song from Voodoo Tank again. And I will see you next time.
30 years ago, he walked away, left Germany behind, built a life his way. Rachel, Nevada, dust and light, jets in the sky, no aliens inside. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will and a heart of gold. Dreamland Resort for 30 years strong, Area 51 his legacy. Scanner to his ear, the signals run wild. YouTube in his heart, camera live. The FBI came, but they can't break him down. His fire keeps burning, it won't drown. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will and a heart of gold. Dreamland Resort for 30 years strong. Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts, his legacy. 30 years of dust, eyes on the truth, in truth he trusts. Dreamland Resort for 30 years strong. Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts, his legacy. Truth in the sky will guide till the end. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts, his legacy. Support the man who brings the truth alive on Dreamland Resort, where freedom survives. Donate for jerk, he'll thank you true. He lives his dream, nothing breaks